life with a grain of salt. Really easier said than done until you experience what it means to quote unquote take things with a grain of salt in life. This can definitely include the people you follow, the books you read, the television that we still continue watching even to this day, even in this time period, in this frame of life. As we go about our seasons, as we go about our days, and the times of day, we realize how much it means to take a grain of salt for what it is in life. What does this mean? Well, we're going to get into this. Grab your favorite drink. Pause if you need to. I'm definitely vibing with my coffee. Really want to vibe with this coffee with you here as we get into this here. So, taking things with a grain of salt, it's not an easy thing to detect as you notice the substance of the metaphor or the simile, if you will. Doesn't matter the technical term of this bit of education, because education is taken in bits and pieces as we learn through school. That's a good place to start. In school, we learn, we process, we gain some skills, whether we want to believe it or not. There are, to this day, some skills that I've been enjoying gaining from school. There are skills that my husband has gained from school and just throughout our family. So in this life, you're going to understand that we're capable of learning, and we've been learning from each other for centuries as a collective and interdependent society. We've just continued to learn from each other. That's why school continues to be so prevalent. We talk about the disagreements we might have with education and the disagreements we might have, which are actually pretty valid if you are somebody who really strongly disagrees with the education staying the same. Not your past education. Maybe your past education was actually pretty cool. In my husband's case, because he's been so educated in school, he's taught me quite a bit about real life experience and has been able to teach other students during his time. And it's kind of taught me that it doesn't look the same for everybody. In my case, I've been able to use these skills to kind of learn how to use my mind when it came to my schooling and education, and to learn how to process, not so much the real world skills, but learning how to actually process life in different ways. And so even to this day, we find ourselves with this sort of mindset of having to find an end goal in our lives. And this isn't to get nihilistic, because nihilism is a whole process that you have to go through, but you're going through it by simply living through complex action. And when I say simply, I don't mean that it's simple to act in this way and live through complex action. What I actually am saying in teaching this to you is that in hindsight, when we get to this point, taking things with a grain of salt could mean a lot of different things. And ideally, this even means learning through this channel, learning through life. This channel being not some platform somewhere on some server, but channeling through life. That's all that this really means, is channeling through life. And when we look at this and look at all of these ideas about life, we really, really want the end goal to be about how we have to follow a certain path, work, go to school, do these things, and only stick to these things with having some hobbies that we try out and realize that getting to priority in real life is more important. And we're taught that like this manufactured mindset is going to get us to some sort of like imaginary success, when even beyond what our success coaches tend to teach us, even within ourselves, we know that it's all games. The education game, the job market game, the entrepreneurship game, the family game, all of it is just games. And at the end of the day, the most important thing that we aren't taught to do, that we are not taught to do in a game, is have a team. That is something that has been lacking in our interdependent society. As interdependent as we are, as collectivist as we can be, as connected as we are, and spiritual as we claim and everything else, we do not know how to manage, how to connect with a team. Managing a team by helping them be organized, by serving resources to that team, by reciprocating in that team, by considering the feelings of each member of that team. The structure in this is not taught, because what we're taught to do is compete with our own team members and feel like we're better than they are. That's why families fall apart. That's why we have so many sort of like people switching jobs. That's why business partnerships fail and friendships drift off and everybody grows bored of each other, because we are not taught to manage this in teams. That's why we tend to jump from community to community, even in minorities. There are so many communities. So when you take the blind and disabled minority, when you take the blind, deaf, wheelchair, cerebral palsy, autism, like I don't want to miss any disabilities because I'm part of this minority. But when you take all of this in mind, for instance, like we tend to divide our own minorities. And it's something that a lot of us are not taught to deal with. We tend to have divisions. We tend to have bias. And believe it or not, as much bias as I've had against what blind services and disabled organizations, like the headquartered governmental politics that come with all of this, I actually find that if you work within the communities, the outreach programs, the surrounding affiliations, and if you are creative in that endeavor and you find your trusted people within that, you can continue to build resources and continue to team build, really, continue to contribute to even your community at large, even if you choose to be kind of like selective, like I do, very selective, very, have a couple of places in my life that I will work within and trust, have a few people in life that I call friends now. I'm a grown adult. I don't need a billion meaningful relationships anymore to feel loved or to feel admired. Like, these are things that you learn by just outgrowing a lot of shit and then learning how to take things with a grain of salt, including the many friendships you have. You take all of that with a grain of salt. The more grown you become, the more grace you need to give to yourself to realize that these friendships are not meant to take over your entire sort of like working career. They're not meant to, these business partnerships are not meant to sort of overthrow and fuck with your job, your work, your money, your purpose. They're not meant to like sort of fuck around with even your ability to work, and like having to wait on other people to sort of make you feel, and this is the hardest thing I think as adults, we want to feel like we're doing something helpful. And when we get any kind of working opportunities, not only are we taught to compete with our team members, but if we want to be the realest team member, we're almost taught to give away our sovereignty at the same time. So it's like two extremes. We're either taught to compete with our team and actually go and divide our own team. We're not really taught to like work together. Or we are taught to give away our purpose in order to share our abilities for them to have purpose. And we almost have to be like, we're taught to be this sacrifice, this sort of goat sacrificial lamb, this sort of starving artist, this sort of martyr for our team, for the people involved, for the job, for the office, for the friendships, for the business partnerships, for the family that you've been born into, for your country that you've been born into. We've been taught how to do these things in such an extreme way. Excuse me. We totally missed the mark in all of this. And so even like this social sort of creator platform that I'm doing here with Life is Our Reality is taken for a grain of salt. And this is the hardest thing to really explain to you. I've given up the podcast a couple of weeks ago. I let it go. I really, in my mind, in my words, I say given up because that's kind of what we're taught to believe. But really in my mind, I'm thinking I've let go of the podcast. I've let go of imaginary pressure that says I must make this podcast successful. And I'm able to do a lot more work. I'm able to take my work history as Google being the mentor that has been able to work with me in teaching me how to work better and continues to work with me to this day in a working relationship, which I'm really grateful for. And I'm proud to say that I'm honored. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm honored. It's not a flex. It's one of those things because being in a minority, we're taught that the only way we're supposed to be amazing is to climb Mount Everest, when, you know, that's only one really cool way. And I love rock climbing, by the way. So I love all of that stuff. And the movie was great. So, you know, don't think I'm ripping on it. But the thing about this is we're not taught to really do this. And it takes a lot of deep work. It takes a lot of nights and days of lost sleep and exhaustion and mental hiccups to understand that sometimes, you know, people are not pushing you away. And sometimes even your affiliations. I work with affiliations in my own minority in the disabled community all the time, being blind and visually impaired and being, you know, on a spectrum and being, you know, I'm part of the blind and visually impaired community. And so in that, I'm somebody who goes into sort of like taking and organizing how I work with these people, how we bring about change, and doing it in a way where I'm not compromising my values. I'm not opening any unnecessary cases and selling myself out. I'm not, you know, sort of like selling out in my life. But I'm feeding my own sort of need to bring about the community that I needed when I first started out as an adult, and to bring about outreach, just to have activities, creator time, and so it's sort of like more in a creator capacity and less about the end goal all the time. That is the most unhealthy way to educate nowadays. It worked in the past when we had no internet. It worked in the past when we had no knowledge of psychology, when we had no researching skills, when we had no choices and avenues, and people take multiple jobs and side hustles and do favors for cash, you know, like especially when it comes to tech, especially when it comes to development, when it comes to washing cars, when it comes to all these things. And there's nothing inherently wrong with any of that. And so it's just a part of life, and it's the way that we breathe, really. But it's the way that adults really have always been in their adult life. Usually, you know, I know it's kind of hard to imagine, but even in the 80s and 90s, adults would have multiple jobs, odd jobs, office jobs, main jobs and side jobs, you know. And it's like, if you think of it like kind of your high school relationships or kind of like casually dating, that's kind of how the working life has made it this far realistically, to advance to the next evolution of like the same sort of history repeating itself, but in a digital way. And that also now includes the types of work that we do. Again, freelance gigs for cash. Again, creative art projects, creative sort of educational projects, creative independent living classes, you know, things that have to do with, you know, there's a few blindness outreach programs that I will be involved in, that my family and I have grown from all of these years, that are not backwards, that do not penalize us for being adults, and that want to continue to enhance the community in a very genuine and deep way, that are a little bit educational. Because what I've learned about all of this is that even in entrepreneurship, even in the most hustle of the hustle cultures, we have education. And so it's not necessarily fuck education at all. It's not even fully necessarily fuck school at all. I think we've gotten to this place of rebellion, and I think we've needed to get there in order to continue to just be a healthy human with animal instincts. But it's not necessarily a jab that the school system means harm in any way. What it is, in actuality, is that maybe the older ways are sort of like giving us choices and wisdom and having this world within it. So taking things for a grain of salt is very important as you go about your life. And I hope that this kind of gets you where you need to go, and thinking about that you're never just going to have one job. You're never just going to have one, you know, goal that you're going to start when you turn 18 and then graduate some diploma when you turn 60, that, you know, you've somehow passed adulthood. Here's your adult diploma as you get ready to die. Like, that's not real life at all. That is a part of life in a very behind the scenes sort of way in which we've been taught to navigate. But it's not necessarily life in its big picture entirety. So take it for a grain of salt. Even my platform, I'm social and then I'm not. So I'm on here and then I'm not, because I have a lot of work that I do. I have a lot of life that I live, and I do have people that mean very much to me and who depend on me and all of that. So it's really worth it in order to keep going with all of this and continue doing this work. So with this community at large and moving forward, there is no pressure to keep going with this social stuff, but putting out the work can say that we don't have to care what people think, and we can be very nuanced in all of this and kind of go into it And so with all of these choices now, and kind of social media is sort of making its way to this other side, and it's very interesting to see where we go next with it. And it's going to be beyond YouTube. It's going to be beyond podcast. It's going to be beyond TikTok. And I love YouTube and TikTok and video, and I love what podcasting had been and what it's taught me and all of that. But we're moving beyond all of this as well. And I don't want this to be a sort of like, fuck you, goodbye, or I'm doubting myself, I'm going to take a break kind of moment. You know, I've had too many of those in the past, like I'm sure you have, but this is more of a, we're seeing what happens next. And we're here for it. So take this with a grain of salt in different ways, even the nuanced ways, you know, even learning commitment over routine is extremely valuable, but also take that with a grain of salt, because having a routine as simply a tool to drive commitment is also valid. It's also probably smart in a certain sense, but using routine only when it's necessary or only as a tool, not as, you know, the commitment matters, and that is your backbone, that is your lifeline, that is your navigation, that is your vehicle. But the routine itself is kind of the steering wheel, if you will, or just one mode of, really a routine is just one mode of transportation throughout life, and then the commitment is the road, the stops on the way that are important to you, the daily trips you find yourself making that are important. That's it. That's the whole entire thing. So take this for a grain of salt for what it is, and we'll see what happens next.